let's work on our UI a little bit, and then we will go ahead and create our tests to make sure that when we do submit this through, it actually persists the changes in the database. Now, first of all, this My Books link doesn't work. So let's head over to our base layout and let's go to My Books. Let's switch this to the home page. Remember, that just goes over to here. And we want to go ahead and add an edit link here so we can actually go through to that page that we have just written a test for. So over in book.blade.php, that component we created, we can just create a link out here saying edit. And we know that we need to go through to books / and then the book ID. So let's grab that and /edit. Okay, let's come over and that's that button done. Let's just add some styling to this. So let's say text blue 500. Okay, and maybe make that small. So text small. Great. So let's click on that and there we go. We can go through to edit that book. And of course we know we can only do this for books that we own. So when we submit this through, of course, we want to actually grab all that data, validate it, and store it in the database, or at least update it in the database. So we're going to go ahead and create out a book put test. So let's say PHP Artisan make test, book put test, and of course pass our pest flag in. Let's open up book store test, grab the refresh database trait, and we could also add this as well. So let's actually open up book edit test. We pretty much want this. So book put test, and we'll just paste this all in here. And we will say redirects unauthenticated users, and that's going to be a put method on books / and then an ID. So we can go ahead and run this. Let's just pull up a command from before and say book put test. Okay, of course it doesn't work at the moment. We get a 404. Let's build the page out for this first of all. So PHP Artisan make controller, book put controller. There we go. And let's head over to our web routes and register this. So of course this is going to be put on that book and book put controller. Great. Okay, so opening this up, let's go ahead and add our invoke magic method, do nothing, and let's add our constructor and make sure we add our middleware. And our test for this should pass. So let's run it and there we go. We can get on with the rest of the functionality. Okay, so what do we need to test for first? Validation. We could also write a quick test to see if it fails if the book doesn't exist. We could have done this over on the other one. Root model binding will always throw a 404, but it's kind of worth doing this if you do switch around your root model logic. So let's just write another test just for the sake of it and say fails if the book does not exist. This is going to be super simple. We know that we need to act as a user. So let's make it simple and user closure based. And let's just say acting as, we'll create a user out in here really quickly. And we'll go ahead and make a put request to books /1. At this point in our test, that won't exist. So we can assert that the status is 404. Let's go ahead and pull our user model in and let's run our tests. And it doesn't look like it works. So we do get a 200 here. That's probably because over in our book put controller, we're not actually accepting that book in. So let's do that first of all. Rerun and we get green. Great. So the next test we want to write is similar to in our book store test where it requires a book title, author and status. However, in this case, the book already exists. So we need to kind of create this first and make sure we attach it to the user. So let's go ahead and say it validates the request details like so. And let's go ahead and create this as a closure based. What I'm also going to do just before we forget is pop a note down here to say that we need to validate that the user owns the book, because there's no point in protecting this page if we're not going to protect the page that actually updates the book. So let's go ahead and create out a user in here. And once we've done that, we're going to attach a book to this user. So let's say user books attach. And again, we'll assign that book at the same time as creating that out. And also, once again, setting that pivot information. So let's just set this to wants or want to read. And let's pull the book model in. Okay, so what do we want to do from here? Well, acting as that user. So let's say acting as that user. We want to go ahead and make a put request to /books/ and then the book ID. And then, not sending any data down, we want to assert that the session has the following errors. That's going to be title, author, and status. Now, the good thing about writing a test like this is if we head over to our bookstore test or our bookstore controller, we have these validation rules in here. Now, what we can do is we can refactor this to a form request, and then we can share that between the update and the creation of a book. And then we can rerun our test to make sure that we didn't break anything doing that. So over in our book put test, let's run this just to make sure. And of course it fails because we get false is true. The session does not have these errors. So what we're going to do is over in our bookstore test or bookstore controller, we're going to copy these validation rules over just to make this pass, and then we can refactor it later. So over in the book put controller, let's paste this in. Make sure we bring in our request object in here, and make sure we pull that rule in from Illuminate validation. Make sure we pull that pivot model in, and let's run our test, and sure enough we get green. So that's working nicely, and that's now good to refactor a little bit later and keep an eye on. So back over to our book put test now, the next thing we're going to do is make sure that it fails if the user does not own the book. Now once again, if we just come over to our book edit test, we have a very similar test in here. Fails if the user does not own the book. So I'm actually going to go ahead and copy this test just to save a little bit of time, and we can include that in here. Now once again, we're going to go ahead and create a user, create another user that owns this book. This time we're going to make a put request through to book/book ID and make sure that fails with a 403. If we run this, it doesn't. We get a 302 just because we're not passing any information down. So let's go ahead and pass in a title, say new title, author, and let's say new author, and status, and let's just set that to want to read again. And now we've got that data down, so the validation is passing. And if we come here now, we get a 200, not good. We can technically update someone else's book. So once again, over in our book edit controller, if we can find that, we're doing something like this. So let's just do that again over in our book put controller down here. If the book can't be found within that user, we abort with a 403. And once again, it's very similar to the other check that we're doing, but we can refactor this later and still make sure it passes. So let's go ahead and rerun our tests, and we get green. So we now know we can't access this unless we own the book. Back to our test, let's finish this off by writing a test that actually checks that we can update the book. So it updates the book, and let's go ahead and write this completely from scratch. So we need a user that we can act as. And once again, we could leverage before each in here to make this a little bit easier. So we can refactor our tests in a minute. And again, I'm just going to copy and paste from here just to make this a little bit easier. We'll switch that over to that user though. And then down here, we want to go ahead and now make a successful request. So acting as that user, we want to put through to /books/ and the book ID, which should be successful now because we own the book. The status is reading, so that should change. So let's go and set the title to updated title. We'll set the author to updated author, and we'll set the status to something different. So want to read, for example. Okay, so now we just need a couple of database assertions. So the first one is going to be on the actual book itself. So let's come down here and say this assert database has. We want to look in that books table, and we want to make sure that for the book ID that we've actually created up here, we have a title of, in fact, we can paste this. So let's grab these two. There we go. Let's just run that. Of course, it's going to fail because we haven't done anything in our actual code to make this pass yet. And let's grab, well, we can just do this from scratch. Assert database has book underscore user and book ID should match, and the status should now be, let's just check what we did, want to read. There we go. Okay, so what I'm going to do is comment this part of this assertion out. We'll just check that the actual book is updated first of all. Of course, that failed at the moment, and then we'll pull that in and we'll add the functionality to make that work. So in our book put controller, the first thing to do is actually update that book. So that's going to be as simple as saying book update, and from the request, grabbing only the title and the author. Let's run our test. We get green. Let's bring in that other assertion. So this one just here, which is the pivot table. Run our test. It fails. So that's not been updated in our pivot. So over to our book put controller, we want to go ahead and say request user books, and we want to update an existing pivot for that book, and the pivot is now going to be the status that we get through from the request. Finally, we're going to go ahead and redirect the user over to the home page, or we could redirect back to the book and flash a message, but we'll just kind of leave it for now. Okay, let's run our test, and there we go. So we get a successful book update. Let's head over to the next episode, do a little bit of refactoring, and of course, make sure all of our tests are still passing.